The sun hung low over the Texas plains, casting long amber streaks across the dusty fields. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and rain that hadn't yet come, a promise in the distance. Colt McCrae leaned his broad shoulder against the fence post, his Stetson tilted just enough to shield his eyes from the glare. He'd been out here since dawn, tending to the cattle, but he wasn't thinking about them now. Across the pasture, Lila Turner knelt beside a young foal that had stumbled into the barbed wire earlier that day. Her skirts were muddied at the hem, her hands streaked with dust, but her touch was gentle and sure as she dabbed ointment on the little creature's leg. The sight of her there, so delicate yet so determined, made something in Colt's chest twist in a way he didn't much care to admit. He'd known Lila all his life, or thought he had. The preacher's daughter, quiet, kind, always keeping her eyes lowered when she passed him in town. But since her father had asked for help mending fences on their side of the property, she'd started coming around more often. Each time, she seemed a little less shy, a little bolder, as though she were trying to understand the kind of man he really was. Now, with the setting sun painting her hair the color of burnished gold, she looked nothing like the timid girl he'd once known. She looked like trouble, the kind a man would walk into willingly, knowing it might ruin him. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he called, voice deep and even, carrying easily across the space between them. Lila turned her head. For a moment, the light caught her eyes, and he could see the surprise there, and something else, a flicker of challenge. "I could say the same to you, Mr. McCrae," she replied. Her tone was soft but steady. He pushed away from the fence, his boots crunching against the dry ground as he walked toward her. "You callin' me, Mr., now? Didn't think we were standin' on ceremony." She smiled a little, though her fingers trembled as she tied off the bandage on the foal's leg. "I thought it might remind you to behave. Darlin'," he drawled, slow and teasing, "you're the one who came wanderin' onto my land at sunset. I'd say you're the one playin' with fire." Lila rose to her feet, brushing off her skirts, though it did little good. The fabric clung to her in the evening heat, and Colt felt a bead of sweat trail down his neck as he tried, unsuccessfully, not to notice. "I only came to help," she said. "You were gone when I found him caught in the wire." He stopped a few feet away, hands resting casually on his belt buckle. "You did good. He'll heal fine." His eyes softened. "But that don't change the fact you shouldn't be out here after dark." The wind stirred, carrying the faint smell of rain and the soft sound of crickets starting their night songs. Lila's gaze met his and held. "You think I'm afraid of the dark, Colt?" He hesitated, caught off guard by the way she said his name. "No," he said finally, voice low. "I think you're braver than you ought to be." She took a slow step closer, her heartbeat visible in the hollow of her throat. "Or maybe I'm just tired of being told what I ought to be." The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sky above them deepened from gold to rose to violet, the stars just beginning to pierce through. He could hear his own pulse in his ears, feel the tension hum between them like a live wire. "You've been starin' at me all week," he said quietly. Lila's cheeks colored. "I have not." He smiled, the corner of his mouth tilting upward. "Sure you have. In church last Sunday. In town on Wednesday. Even now." She crossed her arms, trying to sound indignant, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "Maybe I was just curious." "About what?" he asked. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come right away. Finally, she said, "About why everyone in town thinks you're so dangerous." He took another step forward until there were only a few inches between them. "You tell me, Lila. You feel in danger right now?" The question hung in the warm air. Her breath caught, her pulse fluttering at the base of her neck. "No," she whispered. "Not exactly." "Good," he murmured. "Because I ain't the kind of man who hurts what he wants to keep safe." The foal whinnied softly nearby, breaking the spell for a heartbeat, but then Lila moved closer again, so close he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "You're too big," she said quietly, her eyes flicking up to his, half nervous, half daring. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "Reckon I've heard that before." "I didn't mean," she stopped, flustered. "I meant, you take up too much space, Colt McCrae. You make it hard to think straight." He smiled then, not teasing this time but gentle, almost reverent. "Maybe you shouldn't try so hard to think, sweetheart." Her breath hitched. "Maybe I shouldn't be here." "Then why are you?" The sky was nearly dark now, the first stars glittering overhead. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Because you make me feel something I don't understand. Colt's heart twisted at the honesty in her voice. He reached out, slow enough that she could pull away if she wanted, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers grazed her skin, soft, warm, trembling. Lila, he said, her name a low confession. She swallowed hard, searching his face as though she might find her answer there. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold still, the breeze, the crickets, even the distant rumble of thunder far to the south. Then, barely audible, she said, "If you kiss me, I don't think I'll stop you." He exhaled, a rough sound caught somewhere between restraint and desire. "I wouldn't want to." The distance between them vanished. Her hand came up to his chest, feeling the solid heat beneath his shirt, and his arm slipped around her waist, careful but firm. The first touch of their lips was hesitant, uncertain, but it deepened quickly, the kind of kiss that said everything words couldn't. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, the last rim of sunlight disappeared below the horizon. Colt rested his forehead against hers. "You know this ain't something we can hide forever." "I don't care," she whispered. "Not tonight." He smiled faintly, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "You got more courage than sense, darlin'." "Maybe," she said, her lips still trembling from the kiss. "But you make me want to be brave." They stood there in the quiet twilight, the full safe beside them, the world vast and waiting. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a low, promising growl that made her shiver against him. He held her a little tighter, knowing that what had just begun between them couldn't be undone, no matter how hard they tried. And under that wide, endless sky, Colt McCrae realized that for the first time in his life, he was the one in danger, not from her innocence, but from the way it made him believe in something pure again. The rain came just after midnight. It started soft, tapping at the tin roof like a whisper, and then grew wild, sheets of water sweeping across the open plains. The wind howled through the eaves of the McCrae ranch house, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar. Inside, Colt sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers as lightning flashed against the windows. He hadn't been able to think straight since sunset. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Lila, with her tangled hair and trembling hands, standing too close and looking at him like he was the only thing in the world that made sense. He'd kissed her, and the memory of it still burned through him, bright and dangerous. He told himself she'd gone home, that her father would have noticed her missing by now, but some part of him knew better. When he heard the faint knock against the door, his heart jumped even before he moved. "Lila," he said, rising from the chair. The door creaked open, pushed by a gust of wind. She stood there on the porch, soaked from head to toe, rain streaming from her hair and down the curve of her cheek. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, and in her eyes, wide, uncertain, but unflinching, was that same look she'd given him earlier, part fear, part longing, and something fierce beneath it all. "I shouldn't have come," she said, her voice small against the storm. "Pa would." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hand, drawing her inside. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud, cutting off the wind but not the pounding of the rain. "Ain't nobody here but you and me," he said, his voice low, steady. Water dripped from her lashes as she looked up at him. "I didn't know where else to go." "You could have gone home," he said gently. "I couldn't." He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and took off his coat, draping it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, warm and rough from the fire's heat. "You're shaken," he murmured. "You'll catch cold." "It's not the rain," she whispered. That stopped him cold. He saw her fingers twist in the coat, her knuckles white. She was trembling, not from the storm, but from something deeper. "Lila," he started to speak, then stopped. "If your pa knew you were here, he'd say I've lost my mind," she said, cutting him off, her voice breaking a little. "He'd say you're too wild, too dangerous, too big for someone like me." She looked up again, eyes glimmering with defiance. "Maybe he's right, but I don't care anymore." Colt swallowed hard. There were 100 things he wanted to say, and not one of them felt right. The thunder cracked above the roof, and the lights flickered. He could feel the pull between them like a rope drawn tight, fragile and unbreakable at once. "Lila, you don't know what you're sayin'," he managed. "I do." She stepped closer, her hand resting against his chest. "You're too big," the words barely more than a breath, "but I'll take it." He froze. The air between them hummed. Her words weren't about his size, not really. They were about everything he was, his presence, his roughness, the world he lived in. She was saying she wanted all of it, even if it scared her. "Sweetheart," he said quietly, "this ain't something you can take back once it starts." She smiled then, soft and certain. "Maybe I don't want to." The fire crackled, the only sound between them besides the rain. He lifted his hand, slow as sunrise, and brushed a wet curl from her face. His fingers lingered, tracing the line of her jaw, down to her throat where her pulse fluttered beneath his touch. She leaned into him, eyes fluttering shut. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, as if the storm itself had drawn them together, he kissed her. It was slow at first, tentative, searching, until her hands came up to his collar, clutching at him like she was afraid the moment would slip away. The kiss deepened, turning from uncertainty to something fierce and hungry, yet still gentle, careful. When they finally broke apart, she was breathing hard. "Colt," she whispered, his name like a prayer. He pressed his forehead against hers. "You sure about this?" She nodded, her breath warm against his lips. "I've never been surer of anything." He smiled then, that slow, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Guess I don't stand a chance, do I?" "Not one bit," she said, and for the first time that night, she laughed, a soft, trembling laugh that eased the weight in his chest. He led her toward the fire, his hand never leaving hers. The room was dim, the light from the flames dancing across the walls. He found a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, then sat beside her on the rug. Outside, the rain softened to a steady rhythm, the thunder rolling farther away. They talked for a while, their voices low, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never said aloud before. She told him about how small she felt sometimes, how she wanted a life that was hers, not just the one her father had planned. He told her about the loneliness of the ranch, the long nights when even the stars felt too far away. At one point, she reached for his hand, her fingers fitting between his like they were meant to. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that maybe we were meant to find each other?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I think I stopped believing in meant to be a long while ago. But if anything could make me start again, it'd be you." She smiled, that shy, luminous smile that undid him every time. The firelight caught the gold in her hair, the softness in her eyes, and he felt something shift inside him, a kind of peace he hadn't known he'd been missing. The storm outside faded to a whisper, leaving only the rain's soft patter against the roof. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he pulled her close, resting his chin atop her hair. The warmth of her against him, the steady rhythm of her breathing, it felt like the world had finally gone quiet. After a while, she whispered, "What happens when morning comes?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the window, where the rain traced silver lines down the glass. "We'll face it," he said finally. "Whatever it brings. Together, if that's what you want." She tilted her head up, eyes shining. "That's all I want." He kissed her forehead, a promise in the gesture. The fire crackled, the night deepened, and the storm moved on across the plains. They stayed there until the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon, two souls wrapped in warmth and quiet courage, knowing that whatever waited beyond that sunrise, the whispers, the judgment, the unknown, they'd already chosen each other. And sometimes, that was enough.